We are so excited that you're considering a destination wedding. I get the same questions over and over. So I've put together this recording of a video so that you have some of the basic frequently asked questions at your fingertips because let's face it, none of us have time to sit on a phone call for an hour for me answering the same questions. So I put this together for your convenience. First question I'm going to ask you, is this a legal or a symbolic wedding? If you don't know the difference between the two, the legal wedding is where you actually show up in destination. You have to go through you have to jump through all their hoops in order to get all their government requirements and stuff done. And you do risk them losing your paperwork and they have to mail it back to you after you're married. And it gets very complicated. If you want the easy peasy process, then I highly recommend you do the symbolic wedding because that's where you're going to do the paperwork here in the United States before you go. Then you're going to go to your destination. You're going to have your beautiful ceremony. It's much easier and you don't risk your paperwork getting lost or something going wrong. You don't have to be there as early. So I always recommend the symbolic version. Some destination challenges that you need to consider when you're considering your wedding date is that hurricane season runs from June to November. Peak season is going to be August, September, and October, with September and October being the peak seasons where you will see everything ramped up. November is still considered hurricane season. However, you're less likely to have some. If you want to avoid hurricanes altogether, you need to consider being outside of the hurricane belt, which is going to be places like Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. Also, you need to consider seaweed season runs from April to August in the Caribbean, with the peak times being June, July, and August. So seaweed season is where all of the sargassum and the seaweed starts washing up on shore. And a lot of times, depending upon the year and how bad it is, they do have trouble keeping it cleaned up. So just things to think about when you're picking your wedding date. Do you want to go to an all-inclusive resort or not? All-inclusives are not everywhere. There is a limited amount, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. Of places where they are. An all-inclusive resort is going to give you an on-site wedding planner, so that person does weddings at that resort day in and day out. So they're very well versed on all of their vendors, the locations. You'll have an on-site wedding photographer who knows the best lighting and the best locations to take pictures, that kind of stuff. And then for an all-inclusive resort, your average starting cost of a wedding is about $3,500. Of course, they're always going to give you the opportunity to upgrade for more flowers, more draping, more chairs, that kind of stuff. But if you're trying to keep your costs down, you really need to consider an all-inclusive resort. Our best discounts and promotions are only applicable at all-inclusive resorts. If you decide not to do an all-inclusive resort, you need to consider that you're going to have to hire multiple people. You're going to have to pay for your venue. You're going to have to pay for an officiant. You're going to have to pay for your food. You're going to have to pay for different venues. You may have to start at one place and then move over to a different place for the reception. So you might have your ceremony at one place, then have to worry about transporting all of your guests over to another place for the reception. Also, that's going to put you at probably the same cost as doing a wedding on the mainland, which your average US wedding starts at about $30,000. So just things to consider. Also, where are our all-inclusive locations located at? Again, they're not everywhere. There are no true all-inclusives in the United States or US territories, with the exception of one in Key West, and it starts at about $1,000 a night. But your locations that do have all-inclusive resorts are going to be they're going to be in the Caribbean: Jamaica, St. Lucia, Punta Cana, Cancun, Riviera Maya, Cabo, St. Lucia, Grenada, Curacao. I put St. Lucia on there twice. Costa Rica, Bahamas, Barbados, Turks and Caicos, Aruba, Puerto Vallarta, Antigua, and St. Martin. So just consider those locations. And when you're thinking about where you want to go, and before our phone conversation, decide if there's any of those places that you're definitely not willing to go. Also, just so you know, the best inventory, the best selections, the most cost efficient places are going to be Mexico, and which is Cancun, Riviera Maya, Cabo, Puerto Vallarta, and also Punta Cana, which is the Dominican Republic. But if you have anybody that's opposed to anywhere, I need to know that before we get started as well. Places like St. Lucia, Costa Rica, Grenada, Aruba, those places technically have all-inclusives, but there's just a handful of them there. St. Martin, for example, only has 2 all-inclusives there. and only one of them is one of our preferred suppliers, and our preferred suppliers is where you're going to find your best value. Another thing I'm gonna ask you is this going to be an adult only wedding, or do we need to consider little people under the age of 18 coming? Because that's going to help us decide if you can where we can go. So for example, Grenada, not Grenada, some of these places, okay, so yeah, so it'll just help us decide on where we can go and where we can't go. And also, you need to consider that when you're doing an all-inclusive resort with your wedding on property, those resorts require 80 to 90% of the people who are actually attending the wedding to stay at that resort, and they need to be booking under your group if we have a room block. So we'll get to room blocks in a few minutes. Room blocks, there we go. So pros about room blocks is everyone's going to pay the same price. The pricing is locked in. It's going to have the most benefits and the most bells and whistles, so to speak, for you as a wedding couple to be able to capitalize on. The cons are if you fall below the minimum requirements, which is typically 10 or more rooms, then the benefits that you've been hoping for are going to drop and they're going to disappear, and pricing can be impacted by that. You're also going to have deadlines and that kind of stuff, but I'll help you stay on top of that. So that's not a big deal. The requirements is you're going to have 10 plus rooms typically, or a minimum amount of room nights. So for example, if one couple is coming for 7 nights, that's 7 room nights, just so you know the terminology. What date do you want to have your wedding? Most people start planning their wedding 1 to 2 years in advance. So you might need to be flexible. For example, if you want, let's say, December 9th, well, the resort that you have got your heart set on might already be full for weddings that day. So you need to be kind of flexible. So just kind of keep that in mind and don't get really, really committed to a certain date until you get really committed to a resort you want. Another question I'm going to ask you is about your budget. I'm going to need to know how much you're willing to spend on your wedding, also how much you're willing to spend on your travel, the couple's travel, and also how much you're willing to put on your guest for their travel arrangements. And I can tell you that it is customary for your guests to pay for their own travel. Now, how does this work? So step one is we're going to have an initial 15 to 20-minute phone call where I'm going to go through some of these questions, and you're going to ask me questions. If we're doing an all-inclusive resort, if we're going out of the country, you need to be considering that your guests need to all have passports. So factor that in as well. And it has to be a passport book, not a passport card. Step two, I'm going to send you some quotes after that phone call based on our discussions. I'll send you some quotes, and I'm going to quote you for your guest because they're going to be one of the biggest determining factors as far as budget goes, which is going to determine our resort as well. I will send you quotes, and then you're going to choose your top 3 locations. After you've said, Stephanie, I want these 3 resorts are my favorite 3 resorts, then I'm going to send you wedding package information based on that. If I were to send you all the resorts and all the wedding package information at the same time, you're going to get overwhelmed. So my job is to kind of keep you on track with that. After you see your top 3 choices, you've seen the wedding package, and you say, Stephanie, I definitely want these 2 weddings. See if they have my date available. I'm going to reach out to the resorts and find out if they have wedding date availability. Just so you know, that process takes about 72 business hours. So if you tell me on a Friday, it's probably going to be Wednesday before I hear back from the resort. Unfortunately, I can't just pick up a phone and call them for multiple reasons. Every now and then I have one that pops up here and there that will allow me to pick up the phone and call them, but it's typically done via email. So just keep that in mind. Then once we've confirmed the wedding date, then I'll go ahead and lock in the room block if necessary. If we're not going to do room blocks and we're just going to do individual reservations, then we can start moving a lot faster. Once we've got everything locked in, then you're going to be able to set up your wedding website and send out your save the dates. And at that point, the wedding planning will be passed on to the wedding coordinator at the resort. Well, actually, the wedding coordinator tends to be offsite, and then later into the process, you're going to be connected with your wedding planner on site. So you'll have 2 connections there, and then I will handle the travel details. And just so you know, we do not handle flights for people, I'm happy to advise them and help them. And if they've never traveled internationally, they're going to need my help and advice. So you will refer them to me. Here is my contact information. It's Stephanie Charbonneau. Also, this will help you stay out of the middle of everything. So whenever your guests come to you and they say, "Hey, I need XYZ," you're going to say, "Call Stephanie. She's the person in charge." So just be aware of that. I will handle everything. I basically become your vacation personal assistant or your so just keep that in mind. You'll go through me for everything. You're not going to have to sit on hold for 30 minutes at a time waiting for somebody. So I will handle that. The other good thing about having us as your point of contact is that we get treated differently than you do because we have preferred relationships with our vendors. So anyhow, thank you for taking time to watch this video. I look forward to talking to you. Email me back and let's get your phone call set up so that we can get started planning your wedding. Thanks. Have a great day.